Good morning, almost afternoon. How's everybody doing? So my name is Russell Woods. I'm with Cathi Family Programs, Director in the Technical Assistance Unit, and I will moderate this session. Pretty soon I'll turn it over to our presenters. We have Cathi Palatella and Kim Giardina, I said it right earlier, from San Diego County Child Welfare Services. And they're going to talk to you about how they transform their child welfare system, how they engaged with community providers, tribal partners in a very different way, how that impacted their system, infrastructure building around that, political implications in the community, and different interventions that they have used to better support prevention work. So that's just a little bit of the context. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them in the interest of time. I'll be your timekeeper as well. We're a little bit short, so I think we're supposed to stop at 12:30. So I'll let you guys know when we're getting close to that. We may run over a little bit, 5 or 10 minutes, if that's okay with you guys. But I will turn it over.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Do I need to do the... Oh, okay. How's that? Can you hear me? Okay. So again, I'm Cathi Palatella. I'm currently the Child Welfare Director at the County of San Diego, and I'm here with my colleague, Kim Giardina. So there are handouts on the table. We have plenty more, so if you want to take more for your colleagues or whatever, you can take those at the end. The other thing is, because we are cut short in our time and it's right before lunch, those of you who, if we don't get to a lot of questions and answers and you want to stay, we're willing to stay a few minutes longer. So just want to let you know that we'll be available for you. So today we're going to really talk about our region, and as he said, how we work proactively with our families, our individuals, and the communities to really focus on family well-being and strengthen our protective factors. We work across teams, we work with the public-private sectors in our contracts, and all come around a shared vision and purpose. And that's in San Diego what we call Live Well San Diego. So one of the things that helps us in our success within the county structure is that we're an agency of one. We're an integrated health and human services agency. So already we have public health services, behavioral health services, eligibility, and housing now all rolling up to the same agency director. So as we say, we play better in the sandbox with each other because we all have the same box. So, the same boss in the same box. So basically what that does is, even up and down the state of California with 58 counties, that's not always the case, and it causes problems. So I'm not good at doing both of these, but here we go. So as you can see, San Diego is a large geographic area and is over 4,000 square miles. We're the 5th largest in the U.S. and the 2nd in California. 18 cities with 36 towns and 18 tribal nations. Not many people think of San Diego as having such a large tribal population. And 42 school districts with over 100 languages spoken and a large military presence. We also have one of the largest refugee settlements site in California. You may have seen us on the news recently. And we have the busiest national border. So we have a lot of things working with us and against us in some areas. And we're managed to, enhance those partnerships and work together in a lot of ways. So Health and Human Services Agency serves over 3.3 million people in San Diego. And more often, 1 in every 3 people is served specifically and directly by Health and Human Services Agency. So Live Well San Diego, actually it's nationally recognized. Jerry Milner came to San Diego to learn more about us. Kim and I were invited to an ACF presentation, a webinar where we talked about how Live Well San Diego started. It started as a health initiative when our director first came on board. And it was really to improve the health of San Diego and the county as a whole, and promoted population health as a whole. But what happened is, in establishing these relationships, Live Well San Diego was born and integrated into the whole county. The Board of Supervisors actually adopted Live Well San Diego, and it's something the whole county looks at during budget time, during strategic planning. It's all in the focus of Live Well San Diego. And there's 3 components, 3 major elements of well-being: health, safety, and the quality of life, building better health, living safely, and thriving, respectively. So when you think about what we do in working with children and child welfare and the tribes, these are all the things that you're hearing about today. They can all fit somewhere in those buckets. So then you see the vision. This is what everything starts with. We have the vision with what I just told you. That's our vision. Then we have the strategic approaches, 4 of them. Better delivery system, positive choices, pursuing policy and environmental, and improving the culture within. And then 5 areas of influence, and the top 10 Live Well San Diego indicators. So for the sake of time, you can see you have that triangle on your tables. And what we do is we also have recognized partners. So what kind of came out of that is recognizing partners. So a lot of our community organizations, our contractors, schools, cities, all have clamored to become a Live Well partner. And what it does is it integrates them together, and they can use each other as resources. Currently, we have 388, and 2 of those are net international partners. I think they're Mexico and Ireland. So just some of this was from 2018, the end of May, 375. Now we have 388. So they're constantly being added. So it just shows you our partnerships by sector: business and media, cities and government agencies, and community and faith-based organization, and then schools. Everything we do keeps that in mind. That's where we partner across all of our goals. We all have a shared vision. For them to come in, they're recognized by the Board of Supervisors. They don't really get anything out of it other than a little ceremony for recognition, but they're part of a whole of Live Well San Diego, and people have a lot of pride in that. So now I'm going to let Kim come up and talk about some family strengthening, which, as our agency director likes to say, everything we do is family strengthening. He actually lobbied to have child welfare services be called family strengthening way back when. So that's really our focus here, and you'll see a lot of things that we do to support that.
Thanks. As Cathi said, my name's Kim Giardina. I'm a deputy director with the County of San Diego. I oversee our policy and program support division as well as our child welfare eligibility division. And actually, just to piggyback on the Live Well Partners, Cathi Family Programs is actually one of our Live Well San Diego partners. Recently happened earlier this year. So when we think about our work around Live Well San Diego, because we are an integrated health and human services agency that has allowed us to think a lot more broadly about prevention and then utilize some braided funding to really provide those prevention services. So we sort of think about it in 3 buckets. The primary prevention areas, hoping that families never touch our child welfare system, never get that call to the hotline. The secondary prevention, okay, they've had a call to our hotline, but how do we keep them from entering foster care and provide supportive services to those families? And then for the children who do come into our child welfare system, how do we do the work afterwards to make sure that they don't have another re-entry into our system? So when we think about our primary prevention efforts, we've been able to work strongly with all of our other agency partners to create a broad array of prevention services. These all have a variety of different sources of funding. Cathi and I have been talking all morning, okay, where does Families First fit in now? What funding can we utilize to expand and build on some of these programs? But I think some of the ones that are particularly important have been very helpful for us and might be important in the context of Families First. For our First Five Commission, so for those of you not from California, First Five is funded by a cigarette tax, and so all the extra money on the cigarette tax goes toward prevention services for children under the age of 5. So each county has its own commission that oversees how that tax funding is utilized. So our First Five Commission funds what's called our First Five First Steps, which is a home visiting program, and it does utilize the Healthy Families America program. So Healthy Families America is an evidence-based parenting program. It's on the list that was provided by Cathi Family Programs that Peter Pecora mentioned earlier today. And it has been demonstrated to reduce incidences of abuse and neglect. So our program works with families. It's a little bit more broad than some of the other home visiting programs in that they don't have to necessarily be first-time parents, and they don't necessarily have to be enrolled prenatally. It's still preferred because we can engage them better, but it doesn't have to happen that way. And so the program follows the family for 2 years and provides those evidence-based in-home parenting support. So that has been a great program for us to utilize. On our public health side, we do utilize the Nurse Family Partnership Program, which is another evidence-based home visiting program. That one's a little bit more controlled. In that families must be first-time parents and they have to be enrolled prenatally. So sometimes, we're not able to catch those families, but it is one of the most well-researched and most effective home visiting programs. On our behavioral health side, we have quite a number of projects that we're working on in the prevention area. I do want to point out we have 2 tribal consortiums in San Diego, Indian Health Council and Southern Indian Health Council. They each have a contract with our behavioral health services to provide in-home parenting, in-home case management, and in-home mental health services for tribal families, either on or off the reservation. We actually have a large number of urban Native families who don't live on the reservations, and so the consortiums are able to provide those services directly to our tribal families. And then we also have our Child Abuse Prevention Coordinating Council, which funds several of our prevention efforts. One of the most successful ones has been our voluntary guardianship services. So we've been able to contract with our San Diego Volunteer Lawyer Program, where relatives can go and obtain guardianship and get legal representation for free from the Volunteer Lawyer Program, which is funded by our Child Abuse Prevention Council. So as an effort to try to avoid any involvement with the child welfare system, those relatives can go and get that representation in court to file for guardianship. Yeah.
What do you do to support those relatives after they file guardianship? Will be no funding?
So in California, we do have funding. So they are able to access our KinGap dollars. Yes. So that has been a huge help. One of the other things we did add to that, we just this past year added an educational component for the parents, for the birth parents, because they were not fully understanding what it really meant for their relatives to take guardianship, and so we wanted to make sure they were knowledgeable about that as well. So it's both a service for the relative seeking guardianship, as well as they provide that legal consultation to the parents so they really understand what that means for them to take guardianship. Until the youth is 18. So then when we think about some changes that we've made to how we think about our secondary prevention, so as Cathi mentioned, our agency director has been a huge proponent of really thinking through what family strengthening looks like from the child welfare perspective. So we've adopted several different models that have helped us meet sort of those goals. The first of which is safety organized practice, which is a practice model that's used in many jurisdictions now, but we were one of the first counties in California to utilize safety organized practice, and we've been working on implementing it for about 8 years, which has really just shifted the way that we engage and interact with families and the type of assessments that we do to really think about how to safely keep kids in their home. We also have a contract that we call Community Services for Families, which has a both prevention component as well as a reunification component for families who do have their children taken into foster care. And Community Services for Families utilizes Safe Care, which is another evidence-based in-home parenting program that has been really linked to reducing neglect. We also use a model called Neighborhoods for Kids, which is how we've broken up our social workers. So typically, in most child welfare jurisdictions, social workers are in units based on similar work type, right? They're in a unit with other investigations workers or another court dependency workers. Ours are not. Ours are in units based on clusters, and the clusters are organized in different ways depending on the communities that they're in. So for some communities, they're organized around the school districts. In other communities, like one of our communities literally is split by our freeways, and so the clusters are organized by the 4 quadrants that are split by the freeways. And so all program types are in one unit, and one supervisor supervises all those workers. So the investigating worker sits right next to the court dependency worker, sits right next to the ongoing worker, and the same supervisor is tracking that family over time. So that has really helped us do a better job, one, both more accurately assessing families, because we're not having that constant change of somebody new looking at the case, as well as really partnering with the community because we're organized in those smaller areas and we can spend more time really getting to know the community. We also have a cultural broker program that provides both prevention and reunification services to our African American families. San Diego still has a pretty disproportionate rate of African American children who are in foster care, so this has been another one of our efforts at preventing African American children from entering foster care. And then we also have our Indian Specialty Unit. Our Indian Specialty Unit has actually been around for 25 years in San Diego and works with all of our tribal families and tribal partners in San Diego. They do all the way from the investigation through permanency.
I think we're doing good on time. I know we're talking fast, so should we just take a breath and see if there's any questions based on, before I start on our practice framework? Any questions? No? Okay, so what you're going to see, another handout on your table, is what we call our practice framework, and it's Safety Enhanced Together. And that is what we are doing to change our approach within the child welfare system, because it's our prevention model. And not all families will access or benefit from prevention, so some of them will have to come in and become involved with child welfare. So to demonstrate our commitment to Live Well San Diego, Child Welfare developed a practice framework, and we launched it in March of 2015. In San Diego, we have a vision: every child in San Diego County grows up safe and nurtured. That's what needs to be in the forefront of every social worker, no matter where they are in the system. And they need to be participate in the region's economic, social, and civic life as adults. That's what we prepare our children for. And they're more likely to thrive, we know, when they're part of a family. So it was a big shift, and it still is sometimes for some social workers that have been around a long time, but prevention is key. And you heard today, many of our people on the panel talked about, even the judge, I remove children all the time. So that is our focus, and you'll see some data later, but, I don't want to say it, but, a lot of kids in care, the numbers are going up around the country, and in San Diego, that's not the case. So we're very proud of that, and hopefully.
How do you track that? I'm sorry.
Kids in care?
The success rate is just amazing.
Well, we have case reviews of our safety organized practice, and Kim actually leads that effort, and there's going to be is there a slide on that, a data slide? But we can get to that.
Yeah, we have some.
Yeah, and they actually go in, so we have a whole team of social workers that does our federal case reviews, and they do our safety organized practice to make sure that there's fidelity and it's done properly. For example, when someone calls the child abuse hotline, the tool that they're using, is it done to fidelity? That's one of the things right out of the gate. They're asking family strengthening and engagement questions. So let me see again. So we're working with families to make sure that their health is safe and thriving, which aligns with our Live Well San Diego. And we take a holistic view of the family, building on their protective capacities. A lot of you know that term. And it's focusing more on just safety. You hear Jerry Milner and the panelists talking today. We used to be safety focused. Now it's really on family strengthening. And we, from the very beginning, what made this successful and how we know that we're doing well in these areas is we included the community and all of our partners and the tribal community, the social workers that work in the Indian Specialty Unit, our foster parents, to come up with this vision. They were there from the beginning, which actually helps developing the process and also creates the buy-in. And then child welfare services from all levels, down from caseworker all the way up to management and deputy directors. Former foster youth, we always have to make sure that we include the voice of the child. And so again, oh, you're doing that for me, thank you. So our families who need external support or help building those connections, child welfare focuses our work in 3 areas: enhancing the child's safety, establishing or strengthening children's relationships with parents, family members, and other adults, as known as permanency. Doesn't have to be a person that's going to adopt them, but it's somebody they can call, somebody that you referred to today as an auntie. It does not have to be a blood relative. It's somebody that can help with some kind of permanent connection, and ensuring that children's well-being so that they grow up to be thriving adults. Some of our biggest practice changes have been to improve family engagement. It's very difficult, and you heard again, a lot of stuff that we're covering now is what you heard today, to engage the family. When you were speaking about social workers not doing a good job, and Kim and I looked at each other, okay, they found a placement and then they stopped working. No, that's not okay. It's family engagement, and it's the whole family. and everybody that surrounds and supports that family. One of the things, just to add on this, that with our congregate care reform or continuum of care reform in California, is our child and family teams. Every open case has to have a team created and supporting that family. It's kind of like the old team decision making, but it's not only around placement. Every time a placement change or any kind of required change or some event happens, the team has to come to better to help inform that decision. So that is actually one of the good things that came out of that. So that's it on that. Let's see.
Is there ever opportunity to have like a community informed team, or to work with a community partner who has a team around like preventative?
Well, the child and family team actually is run by the family and the child. So if they have a connection with somebody, they can invite whoever they want into the team. So usually the musts are, you have to have the child present. They determine family, who's going to be there, whether they want their CASAs there, their court-appointed advocate, whether they want them in the room, therapists. They really get to inform that decision. So if there's somebody they're working close with, like a domestic violence case, sometimes there's an advocate in there, for the parents. So the answer to your question is yes. So with this vision in mind that I've been talking about, we've identified those priorities: safety, stabilize, and preserve families. 82% of all our refers do not require CWS intervention, and 43% are voluntary. And the children that are not removed from the home, 60% of these voluntary cases successfully stabilize and preserve the family. Priority 2 is safely care for children and reunify to their families of origin. Again, you talked about reunification today. 59% of our children removed reunify in San Diego within 3 years. And if they can't reunify, then we safely support the development of permanency and lifelong relationships for children and youth. And I want to emphasize again, lifelong relationships. Over 78% of our children removed find permanency either with their family of origin or a new family within 3 years. So on the brochure, you'll see what our values are. This is what our social workers see, live, breathe. Tried to keep it very simple. And these are our core values for social workers that are taught when they come in social worker initiation training and at all points. And it's relationships with children, youth, and families are our foundation. Collaborative partnerships with kinship and resource families. So resource families are now, through the continuum of care reform in California, it's foster parents, relatives, adoptive parents. Everybody's going through the same process, getting the same training and the same support.
What about your tribal foster homes?
They are not part of resource family approval process from the state requirement.
Right, so the state allows the tribes
Yeah.
to still approve their own homes.
Yes.
They can go through our process if they would like, but the tribes can do their own home approval. And the state has recognized the tribally approved process still provides those families with the same access to the resources and supports that families approved through our process would have.
And we're going to share a few stories. We're going to do, because we like to do storytelling to make some points. You're going to hear the one about a Native American family that we did not go through the RFA resource family approval process because we were able to get to permanency by not having, the state restrictions, and it was still a good thing for the child. We always have to try to keep what's the best interest in the child in mind. So helping children and youth achieve their full potential and develop lifelong relationships, shared responsibility with community partners. You heard Kim, we're very rich in our partnerships and our contracts and monitoring that they're responsible and for what they're supposed to be doing. And then a strong working relationship with the legal system. This is key. We have a good relationship with our presiding judge, county council, dependency, the dependency legal group who represents the children, and also the parents. Meet monthly. There's a policy group meeting at the court, and it's really important to really cherish those relationships and work at them all the time because those are your partners, and those are all working, and sometimes not always for the same reason. Some of the things that we don't think that the parent's attorney should be fighting for, they're doing that for their client. So it's important to keep that relationship strong. And then a workplace culture characterized by reflection, appreciation, and ongoing learning. We are trauma informed. All of our social workers are trained in being trauma informed practice. Again, it's very simple, but it's we don't talk about what's wrong with them. We talked about what happened to them. And that's a really important difference to make sure our social workers are asking the questions in the right way and not re-traumatizing. So now we're going to share a few stories highlighting how some of our practice changes that we're talking to you about today have improved outcomes for children and families that we serve.
So I think the stories are the best way to show what does this really look like. We've built this whole infrastructure and this system change, but what does that mean for families? So the first story we're going to share is of the Alali family. So some of you may know San Diego has a very large Chaldean and Middle Eastern population, about the second largest in the country. And so we have a lot of refugee and immigrant families who come to San Diego. So this was a family. They have 3 children, 1, 3, and 5. The mother and father were living in the eastern part of San Diego County. And dad works 2 jobs, and mother stayed home to care for the children. Mom was placed on a 72-hour psychiatric hospital hold due to a suicide attempt, and that was how we got the call from the hospital. The hospital was concerned what was going to happen when mom went back home after being released, and who was going to help care for the children, and if she was going to be stable enough to do that since dad was often out working. So the worker went to the hospital to first meet with the mom and was able to do a really great job engaging with her around her cultural aspects of her family. Learned that the mom had been struggling with postpartum depression after the birth of the last child, but really didn't want to talk about it with anybody in her family because culturally that was very unacceptable for her to do. So she had been struggling for quite some time, but didn't want to seek any services. So the worker spent quite a bit of time with mom at the hospital, really explaining how she might benefit from mental health services. Our behavioral health services actually has a contract with a provider specifically for our Chaldean and Middle Eastern families. And so it was a provider that we could talk to mom about being able to understand the cultural components and building that trust. The worker fully explained the process of the investigation to the mom and talked about the child and family team. And so the mom agreed to have the team meet the next day. The paternal grandmother was staying at the home right now caring for the kids. She was a little bit afraid of sharing all this information with the paternal grandma. She was afraid that she might judge her a little bit and, maybe think she wasn't a very good mom. But she agreed to have the team come together. So the worker went and actually was able to get a hold of dad, meet with him on his lunch break, explain the same situation. Dad was willing to have the team meeting. The worker also went to meet with grandma. Didn't share too much information because she wanted the parents to do that, but was able to get grandma to come while she had an aunt stay with the children for the team meeting. So the next day was the day that the mom was supposed to be released from the hospital, but the hospital was able to find a room for us to have a team meeting so that everyone could come together there. So the mom and the parents had also agreed for a provider from our Chaldean Middle Eastern social services to be present at the team meeting. So the worker was able to have the grandma, the father, another uncle we were able to find, the mom, and then the discharge planner from the psychiatric hospital, as well as the therapist from the Chaldean Middle Eastern social services. And so the family was able to come up with a really concrete plan. Mom was able to share some of her struggles around her depression and how she'd been feeling. The family was actually quite supportive, which I think surprised the mom a little bit. Grandma was willing to stay living in the home for a period of time to make sure that mom was able to take time away to go get her treatment and continue to follow up. The aunt who was staying at the home participated on the phone, and the uncle who were there agreed to assist with transportation. Dad used the only car to get to work, and so mom didn't really have a way to get to her services. So the aunt and the uncle agreed to take turns transporting mom. The aunt also agreed to come over every weekend to give grandma a little bit of a break and would be there to support the family during the weekend. So the worker developed a safety plan with all that input from the family that we monitored for 30 days. At the end of the 30 days, everybody was completely following everything that was in the plan. Mom was accessing her treatment. Grandma had already noticed some changes in mom. She was much more engaged in the care of the kids. She was, being able to get up out of bed, not struggling with her depression as much already. And so we were able to close the investigation without any intervention on our end, knowing that the family was going to continue to follow the plan. So I think that this has been a really big shift for us in that previously, I I don't know that we would have pulled that whole team together. I'm not sure that we really would have utilized all of those family supports to create that plan. And then we may still not have trusted that we call it their network, that the network was really going to follow through on the plan. And so I think this has been a big shift for our child welfare system in terms of how we really approach thinking about that type of prevention.
So as you can see, the family strengthening was at the center of, Kim's story. And it's really important to see the benefits of teaming right at the beginning. Because usually if they're under such a time crunch at the beginning, that's how children get removed without taking a step back and saying, okay, I'm going to spend an extra day or so doing this to try to keep this family together. So the second vignette is about our permanency for youth. So we have a little boy named Christopher. He was currently in a group home. He had been in foster care for 6 years, being bullied in his group home. And when he was young, reunification services were terminated for his mom, and he was currently 12 years old. So one of the things that was interesting about Christopher is we worked with Cathi Family Programs on family finding. And we have to remember, it's not only family finding, it's family finding and engagement. And out of this actually started a contract that we have with the YMCA, who is actually doing that for us now, because for any of you that have been involved or have social workers involved in, our federal requirement to do family finding to the 5th degree, you give the social worker a stack, maybe the clerk runs the family finding search, gets all this information, and they say 99% of the time it's not going to work if it's something else that's on the social worker's plate. So we had a little carve out where Casey agreed to do this, and we did permanency roundtables. So any of you who know some of Casey's work in permanency roundtables, we found great success with that. So basically what happened in the family finding process, we found a father that was out in Boise, Idaho. He had not been connected to his son since birth. The mother had lost touch with him, took off. He didn't know the child was in foster care for 6 years. Nobody ever contacted him. He was not found. So then what happened is we started doing some visitation. After we did some connection with his father, we contacted him. We did letters. There's always a lot of engagement, because at the beginning, nobody wants to call and say, hey, you have a son. Do you want to visit him tomorrow? No, it's a process, and it's a lot of time. So that's why Casey helped us Cathi Family Programs helped us in that process. So over time, then we introduced Christopher to him. This whole process probably took almost a year. So you have to be patient, because you don't want the child to, again, be traumatized or have another disappointment. So what happened was, the end of this story is he was going up for a visit. He had already Skyped with his extended family member up there and his father, and he went up and he flew up with the Casey person, the social worker, and the child. And when they arrived at the airport, the father was standing there with relatives, and they had a big sign at the airport that said, "Welcome home, Christopher." This is somebody who hadn't had a family in 6 years. So then what happened after that? Then they go, well, we have a surprise for you. You're going to go and meet your extended family. So they went to a pizza place. There was probably 30-plus family members with a huge family tree on the wall with Christopher's name on their family tree. So, if that doesn't pull at your heartstrings, nothing will. This kid now is very successful. We terminated his services. He's successful. He's living, with his dad and all this family that he didn't have for 6 years. So this example really highlights permanency roundtables, to be vigilant, do not give up, always keep looking, and then our coordination with Cathi Family Programs. So there's going to be 2 more vignettes that Kim's going to go over. The next one on safety planning, and then also our tribal partnerships.
Can we jump in with a couple of questions?
Yes, please.
Of course.
Does anybody else have any questions? I have a few, but this is your time. Does anyone have any questions about anything up to this point? The vignettes, or not vignettes, the cases?
Yeah.
I do. I have
Okay.
a question. Do you have any, with the all the partnerships that you have involved, these kids, do you have anything that comes after they reach 18?
Oh, yeah, we actually in California have extended foster care up to the age of 21. So we provide case management, social workers until they're 21, and then we have housing programs that are state and federal funded and county local funding for some up to 25. So yeah, you can't always get them to take the services, but when we first actually decided as a state to do extended foster care, we thought, oh, maybe 30% of the kids, would decide to stay in, because most of them are like, see ya. We have extreme high rate of people staying in the system.
Almost 80%.
80% of the kids stay. And one of the things is they can go in and out. So we know that sometimes youth at age 18 say, no, I want my case closed. So they go to court and they opt out because they have a plan. Well, that plan might have been couch surfing, and then 6 months or a year later, they come back or they contact us and say, my plan didn't work out. They can come back in until they're 21. They can come in and out in a day. They can come in and out in a week. So they have lots of opportunity to go out and fail and then come back and still have the cushion of extended foster care. As long as they're meeting the requirements. They're in school or they have a job, they have to have there's 5 requirements. At one of them, they have to be eligible. Yeah.
One of our kids turned 18, and the very same day she turned 18, she said, "Can you please adopt me?"
Yeah.
Because
Did you adopt her?
no, we
Oh.
didn't. I realized that we did not have a program for those kids after they turned 18.
So we also have adult adoption.
We have adult adoption, and then there's adoption assistance. It's federal money that you can get for a child.
That time we didn't, that was several years ago.
Yeah.
We didn't have that option. But we just kept her and said, "We're going to stay for
Good.
a while."
Well, then you're just
Stayed for
him.
a while until she got a job, and then she decided she wanted to be.
Okay. And that's our hope for any child. I mean, even if they're in a foster home and they choose not to stay in our child welfare system, if they have that foundation and that permanent connection and that relationship with whoever's taking care of them, we hope for that to continue regardless. But we all know that sometimes that doesn't happen. Yeah.
So I just asked because we didn't have a program or a system in place for those kids.
How many states have extended foster care now? Do you know? I don't know. Yeah, it's a few do. Do you have a question?
2 quick questions.
Okay.
The first is for you, Kathy.
Okay.
So based on the case you just covered,
Yeah.
Have you found that this collaborative approach in San Diego has helped better engage fathers earlier on, or the paternal side in this process?
Well, interesting that you say that, because that's my little button that I like. I'm an advocate for fathers, and I was the deputy director over our residential services, which are the kids in group homes, and that's where my passion actually started. In stories like Christopher, because I have many. I have another one where we found a father in Mexico, and on his case, the father was listed as deceased for 10 years. And we found him in Mexico. He didn't work out and he didn't adopt him. It wasn't a happy ending as Christopher, but they come and they visit and they spend time together. So there's still a relationship. It's not that solid, but you know what? It's still family. So yes, and we actually have another thing called a Cultural Responsiveness Academy, and that is where our social workers can go through a program and they actually are taught all about a certain race or ethnicity. We've done African American for 2 years, and then they have projects that they have to come and they have to present to our child welfare executive team, and then at graduation they present. For example, one was care for African American hair. We have children at our shelter, our county shelter for abused and neglected kids, and some of our staff do not know how to take care of African American hair for boys and girls, and that was a big lesson. What products to use, because there's a lot of pride in that community about how their hair looks. And when you have a child whose hair is in disarray and the parents come and visit, that hurts them to the core. So that's just one example of something that we implemented. So then this next year we're doing Native Americans. So we're in the process of getting the curriculum together for Native American cultural training for our staff. After that, it's going to be fathers.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And quick question for you for the case that you covered. So this is what I'm most impressed with, is that this is a disciplinary approach, I would say, across systems through Health and Human Services. And with the case you covered, you talked about engaging behavioral health. And what have been, if you could just pinpoint a couple of the primary barriers that were in the way, how did you clear the path to establish those types of relationships that may not have existed in the past in order to do this work effectively now? Because we all know that sometimes with behavioral health or mental health or some other systemic partners, the resources just aren't there all the time, or you don't get them expedited. So how did you clear the path, and what were those barriers?
Yeah, there certainly have definitely been barriers, and our behavioral health services includes both our substance use and our mental health services under one agency. So, I think one of the benefits for us in California is that we have been under the outcome from the KDA lawsuit, which was a lawsuit about mental health services for children in foster care. And what the outcome of that lawsuit required is shared governance between mental health services and child welfare around kids in foster care, so that we're now both equally responsible for ensuring that youth in care get the services that they need. So when we first began to plan for what that was going to look like back in about 2014, we didn't even all speak the same language, right? And in our behavioral health services, they are entirely contracted out in our county. So our county partners themselves do not provide any of the mental health services. They just monitor the contracts that provide those services. So even things as simple as our county partners saw their client as the contracted providers, whereas we see our client as the kid and the family. So even just that difference created a lot of challenges in terms of agreeing how we were going to work together to support families. So we met weekly for a long time to try to hash out what this was going to look like about us working better together. And then slowly, as we got things in place, that tapered off. We had to put formal agreements in place. We have a formal memorandum of understanding in place about what behavioral health services role is and our child welfare role. We co-located and outstationed staff in each other's offices. So we have behavioral health staff sitting in our child welfare offices and vice versa, so that we could better learn each other's systems. We created a BHS 101 and a CWS 101. So both of these were like hour-long e-learnings that the opposite staff watched. So behavioral health services, all their staff had to watch the Child Welfare 101, so they could just learn the basics of our system. And same thing for us. All of our staff had to watch the Behavioral Health 101. Over time, we've been able to work on really becoming integrated partners. And I do feel like we're at the stage now where we don't do anything without each other. I literally contact my peer almost every single day in behavioral health. Hey, what do you think about this? We actually just contracted out the facilitation of our child and family team meetings, and it's a joint contract between child welfare, behavioral health, and our juvenile probation, which we would have never been able to do a joint contract before and actually come to agreement about what that was going to look like. So, definitely the challenges around different funding streams. How do we merge those funding streams together? That actually took advocacy from our agency director, so they were actually go to the state legislature and get some of the statutes changed so that we can now, because we're an integrated agency, we can actually have some flexibility in shifting some funding. So even if it's technically designated for behavioral health, because we're an integrated agency, our state legislature now allows us to shift that funding over to child welfare if that's what needs to happen. So we did have to have some legislative changes to make some improvements.
So just to reiterate two things, leadership at the top that believed in an integrated agency, and then also the MOUs. It took us multiple versions just to say, okay, you're going to be sitting in this office with this partner, and these are your responsibilities. So roles and responsibilities to be very clear, concise, and in agreement. So I know it's 12:30. We have two more quick stories. If you want to hear them, you're welcome to stay.
Actually, just one more story.
Oh.
And you've probably been sitting up here reading it, so I won't go into too much detail, but this is one of our tribal families, and our Indian Specialty Unit had worked with this family. The three children were entering foster care. It came from a family, the mother and father had lost previous children as to the system who had been adopted, and there was issues of substance abuse in the family. And mental health issues. So when these three children were about to enter foster care, our tribal social workers, as well as our Indian Specialty Unit workers, already knew the family, knew the aunt was living on the reservation and the grandma lived on the same property. They contacted them. The auntie was able to have the three children placed in her home. this was the one where we chose to have the tribe do their own home approval because with 7 children in the home, we knew our state regulations weren't going to cut it, and we wanted the kids to be able to stay there. So the tribe worked with us very closely to get the home approval completed immediately so that on the day the children were removed, they actually went straight into that family member's home and never came into foster care. And then we were able to move pretty quickly to complete a tribal customary adoption and get those kids into permanency because we knew that they were going to be going that route based on the previous failed reunification with the family. So that was just one example of our working with our tribal partners. So just to say, part of what's allowed us to do this as well has been the Title 40 waiver. We are a waiver county. Well, California is a waiver state, and we're one of the counties who opted in. So since starting the waiver, we've had a 32% reduction in the number of kids in out-of-home care, and we've had reinvested about $16 million in order to achieve some of these outcomes. But over time, we've been tracking some of our data. So the number of referrals that we're getting to our hotline continues to go up, which was a national trend we saw today as well. But over time, we've had a 41% decrease in the number of removals based on the engagement work that we've been doing with families. And then in terms of entries into foster care, you can see compared to the U.S. and California, San Diego's had an even more significant rate of reduction of entries into care, and then entries into, or number of children in foster care over the last 10 years has reduced by 56% in our county. We used to be close to almost 7,000 children in foster care, and we're down to, as of yesterday, 2,121 kids in foster care. So we've had pretty significant reductions. And here's where you can see some of that data. So a 39% reduction in the total number of cases open, 37% since 2010 change in out-of-home care. So you guys are welcome to contact us, or we'll be around all for the rest of the day as well, and happy to answer any questions you may have.